Hi, everybody, or anybody. Today's lesson is going to be on meritocracy, the myth, bootstrapping, and racist character, and how all of these things are used as tools for white supremacy in the form of things like black on black crime. So let's get started. Hi, I'm live. I'm getting ready to put something into a text on YouTube so that some of the light bulbs can pop up and join the class today. Of course, you can always see um, this video after by replaying it. If you have not done so already, I would appreciate it if you would hit the like button on this video. It has a definite effect on how these videos are seen and uh, how they go through the algorithm, as it were. Let me just type this in. So I am live. Greetings to everybody on Facebook as well. I really appreciate you coming in to learn. So I just posted that. Now, we're going to be talking about black on black crime, meritocracy, and bootstrapping. Should be very enlightening for some people. Uh, for those of you who may not know who I am, of course, my name is Dr. Cynthia Elise Smith, and I'm an anti-racism, anti-white supremacism essayist and educator, and I specialize in alternative views of race, racist color, racist character, racism, and white supremacy. I try to offer uh, critical perspectives on these subjects, including the potential implications of racialized wording in the U.S. language lexicon that are not ordinarily considered. I have had many people say to me, I didn't think of it that way. I didn't know that. And what I want to do is I want to spark your critical thinking skills because there are too many, uh, for lack of a better word, I'll use powers out there today who are trying to stifle critical thinking in favor of disinformation and misinformation, and sometimes through no fault of anyone's own, but through lack of knowledge and education. Um, so, what I'd like to do right now is talk about those things that are needed in order to navigate through the system of racism and the language used. Okay, I call these the three C's of navigating. Let me just get out of the way. I call them the three C's of navigating through the language system of racism and white supremacy. Now, many of you who have already come to class, you know what they are by now, but I'm going to say this on each and every live broadcast that I do, because I want to drill these 3 tools into your psyche. And this is what's done. You repeat it enough, it becomes part of your thinking process. And the first one is comprehension. Of course, comprehension is the essence of understanding what you are saying, being told, writing, or reading, or the ability of one's mind to form and craft imagery and concept from words. Because words mean nothing; they're just characters, symbols, and in order to comprehend what these things are, you have it is the essence. Comprehension is the essence of understanding these symbols, words, this imagery and concepts from the words. The second one is context. Context is super duper important. Okay? It is the ability to understand or comprehend the circumstances. See, so you already have that comprehension tool. So once you have that comprehension tool, then you can understand, you can comprehend the circumstances that form the setting for an event. Statement, idea, statement or idea, and in terms through which it can be fully understood and assessed. Okay? So, context is that ability to comprehend, to understand the circumstances surrounding an issue, an event, a statement, or an idea, and in terms through which those events, statements, and ideas can be fully understood and assessed. Last but not least is connotation. Connotation is important because connotation is the ability of the words to summon the emotion. Words would be really nothing without the emotion behind them, without the comprehension of, of the feeling of the word. Okay? The feeling. It's the ability of the words to summon emotion or an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal meaning, its primary meaning. That you may understand what a word means, but if you don't feel it, it's just a word. That's what people always say. Oh, it's just a word. It doesn't mean anything. Oh, yes, it does. If it gives you a feeling, if there's a feeling behind it, then, oh, most definitely, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Um, it's the expressive part. It's the part of the words, sentences, and paragraphs through which drama is expressed. It creates the drama from the thought and causes people to react in ways like happiness, sadness, grief, violence, and others. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, I want to remind you to please hit the like button, even if you replay this, hit the like button. And if you happen on this, do share it. And I'm going to be talking about um, meritocracy and bootstrapping from my book, White Supremacy and the Post-Racial Colorblind Era. Exploring Visible and Invisible Whiteness in the United States, an unbleached, unbooked look. And I will also be referring to some articles that will be of that I know should be of interest to you in this lecture um, regarding um, black on black crime. I need to tell black people who are still caught up in the notion of black on black crime that it is a myth. It is not real. It is not real. Okay, let me take this connotation off of here. But I do, I definitely want you to connote as I speak about these things. Black on black crime is not real. But what about? No, black on black crime is not real. And let me tell you why black on black crime is not real, even before I get to the articles. No other culture in the world over scrutinizes themselves than black people, black descendants of the enslavement, because this is a not all black people kind of thing. But if you live in racist US, United States, and you are a black descendant of the enslavement, you are going to, whether you want to or not, feel some kind of way about the fact that there is so much crime in our neighborhoods. Do you want to know why there's not much crime in a so called good neighborhood? Because these good neighborhoods are affluent, because these good neighborhoods are in places where the people have uh, accumulated wealth. And that's still not to say that there isn't crime, but because uh, Brad's father is a judge, or Belvedere's uncle is a lawyer, they're not going to have to suffer the consequences of their actions in the same way that law and order has been designed to ensure that black people are treated let's just say, in the worst way possible. We have such unrealistic expectations. Some of us hold unrealistic expectations of ourselves as a group, as a culture, of the likes of which no other culture has ever done. It's because we're in a constant state of trying to prove we're human. Word on the street, word on them racist streets, is that we're savages. We can't help it. Not that it has been designed within the system of the subjugation of us as a culture, that our characters are flawed, that we are inferior, and that we choose to live the way that we do. We place such enormous expectations on ourselves to be superhuman. And I talked about this yesterday in yesterday's class. We're expected to be superhuman. Hi, Riri. Welcome to class. Class is in session. Yep. And we're talking about the meritocracy myth, bootstrapping, and race as character, and how that plays into this so-called black on black crime thing that we seem to co-sign, that we are co-signing on and have been co-signing on for generations. Um, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read an article here that talks about the origins of the phrase black on black crime, because see, you have to understand that there's an origin for just about everything. And black on black crime was not a thing prior to the civil rights movement. It says how the term got hijacked, politically loaded, and calcified into America's racial consciousness. Oh, I wish I wrote that. I didn't write it. Brenton Mock wrote this in 2015. Now, this is my first time reading this, so I don't know exactly what he's going to be saying, but I think that it is going to be important to understand that it had a beginning, a genesis, as it were. And there's a reason for it. The phrase black on black crime gets tossed around so cavalierly these days that it can be hard to ascertain the intention behind it, no matter who says it. Exactly. Now, shout out to uh, Bloomberg, City Lab, and Brenton Mock for this article. When President Obama uses it, it may take on the tone of solidarity, especially when he's speaking at a black church or HBCU. But thanks to social media, his voice carries. The words get copied and pasted into less generous agendas, sans the care of the original context. And I imagine this is what Barack Obama must have said at that time. African Americans often employ their inside voices when discussing the black on black crime issue within safe black discourse spaces. I'm not sure whether he said that, but it's coming up as a quote. Some conservatives use it as a retort, absolutely, to, or a deflation tool. I told you. That's keyword number one, tool. As a deflation tool for Black Lives Matter. And we're talking about the 21st century use of the word, obviously, because if you go back to portions of the 20th century, you didn't hear this a lot. Okay. Okay, so it says as a deflation tool, Black Lives Matter narratives aimed at shining a light on the police killings of African Americans. So, they call them conservatives, but I call them white supremacists. Racists will use the term as a deflation tool which is aimed at shining a light on Black Lives Matter, which is now become, it used to be a statement of fact, but now it has become, and they, I think that the conservatives were successful in turning it into a radical group when it was really a statement of fact, because it is a fact that Black Lives Matter. But they've turned it into a, what do they call, an extremist group, because I suppose anybody who thinks that Black people's lives matter are extreme. Meanwhile, residents of Black communities also use it. I mean, yeah, we do. And this is what I want. This is what I want to um, express. We got to stop using it, just like we got to stop using the N word. We have to stop contributing to the maintenance and support of the system of racism and the ideology of white supremacy that racism is designed to support and maintain. Again, if you have just joined, please like the video. And I see some people coming in, and I'm going to say hi to the people who have decided to join the class and throw some light bulbs up there, because we about to illuminate once again. And of course, there's my Riri. Jekyll, hey, you know what? I told you, I mentioned to you last evening on Donat, I think it was Donat's channel. Shout out to Donat, because I like when he is giving up interesting commentary and subject matter like this. And you said that I should do something like that. And yes, I did plan to, because in the last class that I did, I said that I was going to be talking about meritocracy and bootstrapping and how racist character is used as a weapon. But but black on black crime figures prominently in this, because when you consider that, when you consider that we're supposed to be savages who can't help but be this way and kill each other all the time, even though we have to know by now, because Google is our friend, that we don't do it any more than anybody else within their populations. And there is a plethora of studies. There just enough studies that have been done to show, no more than well, I don't want to get off subject, but there are things that are put out there even by us, such as black men don't take care of their children, when statistics show that that is really not the case. But here's the thing, we are not seen as individuals like other cultures. We are always lumped into a group. What happens to one happens to everybody. We don't even have to know the person. If that person is black, it affects us all. And that's not to say that we should not care, but it is to say that we should not indict ourselves every time one of us does something human. Now, maybe killing is not human. And if that's the case, then you got a whole lot of white people and Asian people and Hispanic people out here that ain't human, just like us. But you got to stop feeding the beast and co signing on something that is just not the case. And stop putting unrealistic expectations and overly scrutinizing ourselves. And this is it really, it just comes out of the desire to be seen as human in a world, in a country that does not want to see us that way. And it speaks to what I talked about in the other class, how we basically have to wear a red S on our chest and behave like superhumans just to be considered human. So we put ourselves down just an enormous amount of the time as an entire culture. And it really has to stop. It has to stop. It has to stop. Okay, let me get back to this article again. If you, oh, before I get back to the article, if you think anybody might be interested in the topic, in the subject matter, oh, okay. If you're in if you think anybody, any of your friends, relatives might be interested in the subject matter, whether you want to tell them about the replay, share it. Do share. If you are not subscribed to my channel, definitely subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to be giving much more. I'm going to be doing much more live presentations, lectures, things of that nature. Sometimes I will even show videos and things like that. In fact, after this is over, after I finish reading this, I'm going to play for you a video I did a while ago on the subject of on the subject of bootstrapping and racist character. And then I will move further into reading for you the meritocracy myth and bootstrapping from my book. Okay? So, anyway, let me get back to this article. Okay. Meanwhile, residents of Black communities also use it, as they have for decades, to express concerns about safety in their neighborhoods. Yes, in our neighborhoods. The African Americans in this latter group are often employing their inside voices when invoking the Black on Black crime issue, meaning within safe Black discourse spaces, and usually as a way of stirring Black community. What's being meant by this statement is, and it is true, that a lot of times we will use the trope of Black on Black crime in an attempt to create or foster unity. Most of us will say, we have to unite, we have to stop fighting each other, we have to, but these things are unrealistic expectations of us. They're really unrealistic, because humans are going to crime. They're going to crime. And when they're in situations where, oh, and in fact, I did I have to find it, but I did a little research on the kinds of crime that are most prevalent. If you really want to know the truth, murder among the Black community isn't as much as, say, theft and things like that, and receiving stolen property and things like that. And why do you think that's the case? It's because we are living in the poorer communities. You can best believe up there in Appalachia, among the white poor, they criming too. And they criming among themselves. All right? Make no mistake. Make no mistake. How can one term shapeshift so abruptly and easily? Why? Because it's a myth. It doesn't, it's not real. Like I call them paradoxes within white supremacism. Like race does not exist, but it does. That's a paradox. you know Race as color exists. Race as character exists. Why? Because race exists. But when you hear people say, but race is a social construct, it's not real. Oh, yeah, 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 it is. But it's not. Black on black crime, for all intents and purposes, is real. But it's not, because everybody crimes. Humans crime. Unless and until somebody comes up with something to show that we are the only people on the face of this earth who do crime, and we are the only people on the face of this earth who do crime to each other, that'll never happen. Anyway, getting back to this, it's a myth. Many writers, notably Slate's Jamel Bowie and Natalie Hopkinson for The Root, have done a tremendous service exposing the term as such. And I'm going to try to find Jamel Bowie and Natalie Hopkinson and the articles that they write for in The Root. And you can also feel free to do so yourself. They correctly point out that what's referred to as black on black violence is really a. Oh, oh, okay, here we go. Here we go. I couldn't have written this better myself. Black on black violence is really a byproduct of residential segregation and concentrated poverty. Let me repeat that. Black on black violence is really a byproduct of residential segregation and concentrated poverty. Black homicide offenders don't kill people because they have dark skin. Black homicide offenders do not kill people because they have dark skin, like a Klan member would. That's an excellent example. This may seem obvious, and yet the myth of black on black crime persists. Clearly, though, there's more work to be done on the use of this highly charged phrase. Understanding the term's origins helps further explain why it is so stubbornly entrenched in the public lexicon. In December of 1970, remember I told you, it really didn't start until after the civil rights movement. Oh, Jesus. Wait, no, it did not start until after the civil rights movement, because black people were becoming again. This was after the nadir and the beginning of the civil rights movement, where I was black and I'm proud. and black had power. So in December of 1970, Chicago Daily Defender columnist Warner Sanders wrote about getting invited to speak at a seminar on black crime. To prep for the talk, he caught up with a neighborhood hustler named Fast Willie and asked him why he robbed and beat up black people who are brothers. See, during the civil rights movement, that's when you heard the term brother and sister, and brother and sister, and sister and brother, my brother. There was meaning, there was agency. There was agency in being a brother and a sister. Okay? So he caught up with a hustler named Fast Willie, and asked him why he robbed and beat up black people who are brothers, quote unquote brothers. See, because what he was trying to create his narrative for the black on black crime speech that he was getting ready to give. Okay. Willie's response was an early indication of what we need to know about the supposed black on black phenomenon. We go where the business is and where the man ain't looking. Can you see me going up to Deerfield, black as I am, trying to stick up? The man would be on me so fast I couldn't get a chewing gum wrapper. Out here, the man is too busy whooping them Panthers and giving tickets to mess with me. Anyway, he don't care if niggas get ripped off, but you can bet he watching his thing back in his own hood. He watching his thing back in his own hood. Okay? Yeah, he pretty much said it. Deerfield is a North Chicago neighborhood that's historically been predominantly white and is 96% wow, and is 96% white as of 2015. So they managed to keep their sundown town sunned and downed. The rest of Willie's testimony is self-explanatory. He commits crimes against other black people because that's who he lives around. And that's what police will let him get away with. And that'll give you an inkling as to why there's so much crime in black neighborhoods, because the cops don't care. That's why. And crime is going crime. Jesse Jackson also saw things playing out this way, and in that year rebuked white government officials and mainstream media for their silence and ineffectiveness in dealing with the present black on black crime crisis. Thank you, Jesse Jackson, for perpetuating the notion. Sometimes those of us who are supposed to be helping just kind of jump on that bandwagon. Jesse was complaining to local and state officials that the criminal justice system had been punishing black criminal suspects more harshly when their victims were white as opposed to when their victims were black. Well, yeah, we know that because that happens today. That hasn't changed. The civil rights movement was really nothing more than a limited apportionment of opportunity for education, employment, and housing, and things such as equity, real opportunity, and justice didn't happen. Okay, just economic opportunity in housing, education, and employment. And that was limited apportionment. So Jackson was complaining to local and state officials that the criminal justice system had been punishing black criminal suspects more harshly than when the victims were white, as opposed to when the victims were black. Pointing to the killing of more than 70 black youths that year, Jackson was illuminating a paradox. What did I tell you, folks? A paradox that remains with us today. That black neighborhoods are often simultaneously under policed and over policed. Just like that old, just see, but believe me when I tell you that white supremacism is a series of paradoxes. The ideology creates a series of paradoxes. Race is real, race is not real, black on black crime is real, black on black crime is not real, race is not real, racism is real, racism not real. And in this case, under policed and over policed. Paradoxes. Things that happen at the same time like this. It's like, we're under policed where it counts and over policed where it doesn't count. Your headlight goes out, you can get killed if you're stopped. You can be killed. Oh, how they say, but I don't have to worry about it because I am not monetized and don't plan on being monetized. Yes, they can be killed. So it says that black neighborhoods are often simultaneously under policed and over policed, with black victims of violence less likely to receive what? Class, light bulbs, justice. What did I just say? During the civil rights movement, we were looking for equality, equity, opportunity, and justice. What did we receive? Integration, which was nothing more than the illusion of sharing white spaces and places, as though this opportunity would somehow equalize us. But of course, we know that that was not the case. And what we did receive was economic limited apportionment in education, which they're trying to take away again, employment, which they have really worked hard to prevent, and housing, which, of course, many have blamed poor and black people for that big 2008 housing bubble burst, when they were the ones issuing these predatory mortgages in the first place. And why? Because they knew that they were supposed to create equality in housing and had not done it. And because there was an impetus to begin to create opportunity for better for home ownership, and they never intended for there to be real true wealth production by black people. So they put together these predatory loans, and people lost their homes as a result. But I digress. So it says, with black victims of violence less likely to receive justice, as Mother Jones's Edwin Rios and the nation's Kai Wright recently reported. Cook County Criminal Court Judge Saul A. Epton attempted to dispel this perception in 1971. Thank goodness he tried to dispel the perception in 1971. I was 18 in 1971. When he gave two black men the same sentence. Hmm. He gave two black men the same sentence of 100 to 150 years in jail after each was convicted of murder, one for killing a white person. Hmm. So he said, okay, I'm going to get this black I'm going to get this black man the same kind of time. I'm going to be equal. I'm showing neutrality. Now, I talked about that word neutrality. One for killing a white person, the other for killing a black person. Epton said at the time he did this to address a fiction in the black community that the sentence would be less when a black person kills a black person than when a black person kills a white person. Wow, these people. Those sentencings were reported in the mainstream daily Chicago Tribune newspaper, where the conversation around black on black crime had officially entered into the realm of white readership officially in 1971. Okay? When we talked about crime in our neighborhoods, we were talking about crime in our neighborhoods as it related to crime in our neighborhoods. Why? Because we were segregated and they were our quote unquote black neighborhoods. They took it and turned it into black on black crime. You see? And it was quickly expanding. In 1972, the African American psychiatrist Alvin F. Poussaint, later known for his consultancy on The Cosby Show, I don't know why am I getting allergy issues here? My throat is getting scratchy. My eyes are starting to water. Excuse me. Excuse me, class. Um, Tackled the issue in one of his first books, aptly titled Why Blacks Kill Blacks, which included an introduction from guess who? Anybody want to raise your hand and tell me who the introduction to Dr. Poussant's book was? Me. Jesse Jackson. Soon after, the tone of the conversation began to shift from black writers chastising white officials for neglecting black victims of crime in black neighborhoods to direct chastising of black communities themselves. Do you see what's going on here? Just like we were complaining and we were protesting for equality, equity, opportunity, and justice, and they turned that into desegregation of white spaces and places as though that was going to somehow make it all right, or how to say, make it make sense. They took our desire to have the police come to our neighborhoods and do the protecting and serving that they did in the white communities. We wanted them to do it in our communities, and what ended up happening? What ended up happening? We got faulted. And if you do have an opportunity to read my book, you will find, you will determine, you will discern these facts. That it was part of the post-racial colorblind era's attempt to change, basically to make a mockery of Martin Luther King's statement about character and being seen and acknowledged for our character as opposed to our color. Race as color was flipping to race as character. And in so doing, what we were complaining about got turned in on us, and we became our own problem to the exclusion of everybody else. See, everybody else were protected and served, but we were not protected and served. And guess what? It's our fault that we are not allowed to be protected and served like other communities. I hope you're getting this. I hope those of you who are in the class and those of you who will see the replay will understand how they flip it. Just like affirmative action was supposed to be a form of reparative relief for the generations of discrimination and denial of equality of opportunity. And they flipped it and said, in so doing, we're discriminating against white people. And that they're allowing those inferior, less qualified black people, and they turned a program designed for reparative relief for us into something to be ashamed of, to be ashamed of. While in the background, it was working for white women. Soon after, the tone of the conversation began to shift from black writers chastising white officials for neglecting black victims of crime in black neighborhoods to direct chastising of black communities themselves. Check out this editorial in the November 1973 issue of the African American magazine Ebony, which declared that the black criminal must be told in no uncertain terms that his assaults and thievery, see, this black criminal, differentiating is a racist color, black criminal, must be told under no uncertain terms that his assaults and his thievery and his dope pushing and his murders will no longer be suffered in silence. Meaning, we gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about all that. We're gonna talk about it. We're not gonna go into these neighborhoods and put an end to it. And at the same time, we're gonna still keep picking you up for jaywalking and for having that cracked headlight or not putting on your signal when you're making a turn or move to another lane. And we still gonna kill you if we want to. White cops. So they were given the okay. They were Ebony, okay, magazine was co-signing. Jesse Jackson was co-signing. Poussin co-signing on this notion that helped the white power structure of white supremacism to use it against us even more. And now it is just so ingrained in the psyche of black people that we just seem to not be able to get rid of it. I say, just wipe it out your mind. Tell yourself there's no such thing as black on black crime. There certainly wasn't prior to the 1970s. Not as a term in the lexicon of U.S. racist America. So here's that article. It's in tiny writing, so I'm going to try to read it. My eyes are getting really bad. It says, what can be done? The problem of ridding the ghetto of crime is a difficult one, and the solving of that problem must start within the ghetto itself. See, they're saying, black people, we know you have a problem with crime in your neighborhoods, but it's got to start with you. Because even though you're paying these taxes, these city taxes and these state taxes and these federal taxes, and you should expect help from your government, that ain't gonna happen. So any fault that is to be placed on the crime in your neighborhoods is your fault. Within every black ghetto, the good, law-abiding, hard-working people greatly outnumber those who live outside the law. Well, thank you for admitting that, at least. The law-abiding people must, therefore, demand the right to live in peace and in safety. Well, I mean, damn it, ain't that what we've been doing since that time? I mean, come on. Isn't that what we have been doing since the civil rights movement? And that demand must be made and enforced by whatever means necessary. I would say, what? So I guess they're saying we should begin to kill each other because I mean the police are not coming in to protect and serve. So what means necessary are you saying, are you giving to the law abiding people in these neighborhoods? What are you saying? What exactly are you saying? Buy guns and kill these black people? The black criminal must be told in no uncertain terms that his assaults and his thievery and his dope pushing and his numbers will no longer be suffered in silence. He must be made to know that the decent black people are going to use their ballots and their marching feet. We have ad nauseum been using our ballots and marching feet since since the 1960s, when we were asking for justice as well as equity, opportunity, and equality, all of which would have meant that they would have to now dismantle the system of racism, from which the lack of protecting and serving stems. Marching feet to demand that the politicians they have elected now provide them with adequate, truly effective police protection as well as amelioration of all the horrid social conditions. I mean, come on. This was back in 1972. Okay? 73. This was back in 1973. Isn't that what we had done in the 1960s? Isn't that what we do today? We pay taxes for these police who are consistently receiving money, millions and millions of dollars of our tax money to protect and serve us. And yet we are still being told that it's our fault that our communities are crime ridden. Think about the fact that it is strategic that our children and that we have grown to become to be afraid of police and afraid to see them in our neighborhoods because of state sanctioned violence, because of what they do to us. Okay, so that has the effect of absolving them from protecting and serving. Because if that whole idea of, remember, every now and then this gets bandied about community policing, bring the police in, let them let them get to know the neighborhood so that the people are no longer afraid of them. That's not what they want. They want you to be afraid of them. They don't have to protect and serve you, because every time they come into your neighborhood, you're like scared. And rightly so. Paradoxes. So it goes on to talk about Operation Push and decent black people and all that stuff. And then it says the editors of Ebony call for the convening as quickly as possible of a cross sections of citizens who are concerned about hands. Come on, what are we talking about here? Hands, black on black crime. If you're under, I'm getting hair all up in my face. Ow! I love my hair, but it gets all up in my face, gets stuck to my lips. Um, if you are understanding this, um, if you're understanding what's being said here, if you're getting it, if your light bulb is lighting, throw in a light bulb to let me know that your light bulb is lighting and that it's got it, that you're understanding. It had a beginning and it was co-signed by prominent black leaders, and it became ingrained into the black psyche of people who were already generationally traumatized into believing that we are inferior, not only to white people, but everybody who ain't us. Hence, black on black crime. And they say here, the editors of Ebony will call for the convening of a as quickly as possible so that they can discuss, and of course this convening, this convention of like-minded prominent black people discussing black on black crime are going to get air coverage. They're going to get mainstream media air coverage. Black on black crime is about to get absorbed into the white supremacism ideology and used against us by both black and white people. It says law enforcement officials, sociologists, church people, youth, everyone who can possibly contribute something worthwhile to a master plan. What master plan? Change the dynamic of the policing system from its roots of slave patrols to protect and serve white people to an equal and equitable opportunity for all people, including black people, to be protected and served and not made victims of the police. So that when crime is criming in the black neighborhood where integration was supposed to eliminate segregation, so that there was not supposed to be able, there was not supposed to be black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods anymore. That's what desegregation was supposed to accomplish. Never happened. So what they decided was racism, uh, in the form of segregation, never went away. Light bulb. And if they were calling that racism, well, then guess what? It's still here. Master plan of attack on this most serious problem ought to come together in conference and make decisions about what must be done. Well, if you don't know what must be done, what must be done is the dismantling of racism and state sanctioned violence so that Black people can receive justice just like everybody else. But they want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about a solution because the solution is too clear. They wanted to talk about Black people killing other Black people and how bad that is, and how we in our neighborhoods are the reason, are the fault, because we are not yelling loud enough. We are not protesting long enough. When all they got to do is reorganize the structure of policing in this country so that it's not racist and white supremacist. We invite the NAACP, the SCLC, CORE, Operation Push, the National Urban League, the Congressional Black Caucus, and all other groups and individuals who have the ear and respect of Blacks to take the lead. Okay, so in 1973, each and every one of those organizations were considered the leadership of Black America. And they were all going to get together in this big confab. They were all going to get together in this big confab to discuss Black on Black crime. Remember, I told you it had a beginning, it had a genesis. So if it's got a beginning, we can give it an ending. We can stop saying. We can stop using it. We can take it out of the vernacular. We can take it out of the lexicon of racist white language. We can stop blaming ourselves for human behavior. African Americans in Black neighborhoods had been robbed and plundered. I want you to hear this. This is very important. African Americans in Black neighborhoods had been robbed and plundered by white landlords and real estate developers for decades. Before this point, especially in Chicago. See years of writing by the Atlantic's Ta-Nehisi Coates and Burl Satter's 2010 book, Family Properties, Race, Real Estate, and the Exploitation of Black America. These conditions certainly set the stage for the quote, black on black crime that Ebony and the Defender bemoaned. It's perhaps no coincidence that the term began appearing. Now, I want you to hear this. It's perhaps, and I'm going to take out the perhaps, and I'm going to say it is no coincidence that the term began appearing right when white flight was in full bloom in cities like Chicago. Of course, there was black on black crime. Black people were mostly those left behind in those cities. Let me put my earphones back on because I can't hear. Not that I can hear anything yet, anyway. Still, the burgeoning African American middle class was wrestling with how to address the growing crime problems in their segregated communities. The NAACP passed a resolution on black crime in 1980, during Reagan's era, Lord, stating that it was opposed to the perpetration of criminal activity regardless of who commits the crime. While it is acknowledged that said crime may be the result of frustrations caused by, yeah, here's the acknowledgement. This is the part that cracks me up, because they'll acknowledge the reasons, the real reasons behind this so-called black on black crime, but then it's pretty much summarily dismissed. While it is acknowledged that said crime may be the result of frustrations caused by unemployment, poor academic training, and inadequate housing, it's still resolved that police and courts needed to recognize that crimes committed by blacks against blacks are as unlawful, are as humanly devastating, and are as undesirable in our black communities as crimes committed by blacks upon whites or any other group. That's kind of jacked up. Because in none of this discussion am I hearing anything about white on white crime. It doesn't even have a sound. It doesn't even resonate. Say it. Say it with me. White on white crime. Hispanic on Hispanic crime. Asian on Asian crime. Indian on Indian crime. Caribbean on Caribbean crime. Pick a geographic location. Because it's not so much about blacks on blacks versus blacks on whites. Come on. They're skirting the issue. What they should be saying is it's no different, really, among human beings who are poor and disenfranchised. Donald Wilson, a geography professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana campaign, says that this early 1980s period is when the term black on black crime really began sticking to the public conscience. So it was introduced in the 70s. It was introduced in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, mid to late. And by the 1980s, it began sticking. And trust me, it was helped along by President Ronald Reagan. And those of you who may remember or who may not remember, Ronald Reagan is the one who um, perpetrated the um, Willie Horton uh, story and welfare queens. Oh no, that was Bush that did Willie Horton. Reagan was welfare queens. As he explains in his 2005 book, Inventing Black on Black Violence, the Chicago Tribune ran a multi part news report that framed urban, remember, urban is a euphemism or was a euphemism, and all, up until, uh, like, you don't really hear too much about urban now, maybe urban music, but urban is a euphemism, a long used euphemism for black. Okay, urban. It's because white people ran away from the urban areas to the suburbs. So the Tribune ran a multi part news report that framed urban violence squarely as a problem born of, are you ready for this? If you want to know when and how our black youth became the perpetrators or got saddled with their own unique brand of criminalization, the multi part news report framed urban violence squarely as a problem born of black youth. So by the 1980s, young black people, young black youth, our own children were our problems. I want you to think about it in those terms. By the 1980s, it was determined that our own children were our problem. And as a caveat to that, why? Because we, as the adults, were so damaged and such savages that we couldn't do anything but give birth to savages. But that it is the youth who are the problem. Imagine that. Imagine what that does to the minds of young black children, that they are singularly the problem for the issues of crime in our neighborhoods. Yep. Black on black crime became an effective vehicle for the rise of What was I talking about? President Reagan? Black on black crime became an effective vehicle for the rise of Reaganism. Listen, people, this is unbleached information. I'm going to give it to you straight. You have to understand where it really comes from in order to change your own mind. I'm not trying to change it for you. I say that all the time. I'm not trying to change your mind, but I'm trying to give you those tools, the, that which makes you think critically enough to decide for yourself that you will change your own mind. It's as simple as changing your mind. All you have to do is say, there is no such thing as black on black crime. There is no such thing as black on black crime. That is a trope. That is what was created in the 70s and expounded upon in the 80s and co-signed by the black leadership at the time. And those of us black people who were susceptible to this suggestion due to generations of trauma, why wouldn't we believe that these same children who have no opportunity, no equality, no justice, nothing, wouldn't become victims of their neighborhoods? The term fit very well for that time period because it pointed to, quote, urban African Americans as being responsible for their own problems. See, and I'm just going to say this. Today, I tell people, when you don't get that promotion, when you don't get that job, when you get turned down for that mortgage, the first thing you need to say is racism stood in the way, unless otherwise determined. Make them prove to you that it wasn't racism that formed their opinion, their decision. The post-racial colorblind era, that period between the civil rights movement and what I call when Trump was installed as president in 2017, black people were led to believe that every single thing that happens to them is what? Their fault. That if they just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, if they could just concentrate and achieve through merit, they could succeed. So The term fit very well for that time period because it pointed to urban African Americans as being responsible for their own problems, says Wilson. There was no reason to racialize this. What did I just say? I don't think it's I don't think that I didn't get that job because of my race, because of racism, um, or I think you know somebody they must have had more experience than me, or it could have been framed as economic or societal driven crime. Why not call it oppressed youth on oppressed youth crime? Or the disenfranchised on disenfranchised crime? Some Black organizations were careful to couch their stances in recognition of structural racism and poverty as contributing factors to rising crime. Well, good for them. Good for them. But as tough love as the NAACP's resolution was, it wasn't much different than the words of the rapper Tupac Shakur, who once said in the early 1990s, the same crime element that white people are scared of, Black people are scared of. So while waiting for legislation to pass and everything, we next door to the killer. We next door to him because we up in the projects with 80 niggas in the building just because we're Black. We get along with the killers or something? So he's saying just because we Black, we get along with the killers or something? We get along with the rapists because we Black and we from the same hood? What is that? We need protection too. Rest in peace, Tupac. Rest in peace. Rest in peace. You can read in Shakur's statement the unresolved tension of wanting to feel safe in one's own community without Black people themselves becoming branded as the pathogens for crime and disorder. I want you to understand how easy it is to blame yourself when you have no self worth. Part of healing and part of gaining agency for yourself as an individual is to understand there's no such thing as Black on Black crime. Say it. There's no such thing as Black on Black crime. But the right wingers seized upon the worst part of the myth of Black on Black crime to justify the war on drugs and other, quote, tough on crime policies that proliferated through the 1990s. Another fast Willie, now this was funny. Another fast Willie named Bill Clinton used such sentiments as cover to co sign on policies that drove incarceration rates of African Americans through the roof. And we all know, we all have little snippets of knowledge about that. Is this what Jesse Jackson was asking for when he appealed to government officials to intervene in 1970 at the genesis of the term black on black crime? Likely not. But Wilson believes that many well-intentioned black people like Jackson fell into a trap. Yes, absolutely fell into a trap. And trust me, there are many, many traps out there. Many, many traps out there. And this was a big one. When they introduced black on black crime to the existing powers. Which led to a calcifying of the term in the American common consciousness. Yes. Calcification. It's like it's almost like you have to get a scraper and scrape that. I'm going to say it, damn it. Scrape that shit out of your brain. Scrape it out. Just get rid of it. Get rid of it. The term ended up contributing to the mass incarceration of African Americans, says Wilson, because it helped normalize. Remember when I talked about that euphemism, normalizing the notion that the ways and cultures of black youth are responsible for crime. Got us looking at our own kids. Our own kids. While minimizing, remember, they don't give you they'll acknowledge what really caused it, but they give you your children as the problem and perpetuate that notion until it calcified. So they while minimizing the structural problems that America created that led to the crime in the first place. See? If you're understanding, hit that light bulb because I'm illuminating you all today. While the words black on black crime may have first appeared in print in the 1970s and in policy by the 1990s, the sentiments behind the phrase were expressed long before that. In Khalil Gibran Muhammad's 2010 book, The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern Urban America, he finds that these notions were first, here's something very interesting. These notions were first raised in the late 19th century. Makes sense. This is when white scientists began manipulating data around arrests and imprisonment to equate blackness with criminality. So this must have been quite possibly right after the enslavement ended because they needed to justify creating the system of racism, I mean, for lack of a better term to call it, the system that was designed to maintain and support white supremacism, they needed to equate blackness with criminality. And it makes sense because they began to portray early on black people as lazy, shiftless, of no account, just laying around, sitting around eating watermelon and fried chicken. And the black woman as at the same time a mammy like Aunt Jemima and a Jezebel, oversexed, oversexualized, and the black men as rapists. This was done as something of a warning signal about African Americans moving to northern cities from the South. Hmm. A warning signal. So that those black people that were moving from the South to the North would already have a tag of criminalization on their heads. Muhammad wrote, at the dawn of the 20th century, in a rapidly industrializing, urbanizing, and demographically shifting America, blackness was refashioned through crime statistics. Northern black crime statistics and migration trends in the 1890s, 1900s, and 1910s were woven together into a cautionary tale about the exceptional threat black people pose to modern society. In the Windy City, in the city of brotherly love, and in the nation's capital of commerce, this tale was told. Infused with symbolic references to American civilization, to American modernity, and to the fictive promised land of unending opportunity for all who, regardless of race or class or nationality, sought their fortunes. Black social scientists and some white ones tried fighting off these characterizations during this era, yet the notion of black criminal prevailed to the point where even some distinguished African American thinkers began subtly adopting it. We got to stop co-signing people. And the first step to stopping the co-signing, the co-signage, is to say there's no such thing as black on black crime. First step. You want to know what you can do? You can stop thinking that it exists. Stop believing that it exists. Trust me, it'll free you. It will free you. Take this quote from the 1930s. The failure of large cities to provide adequate bathing and recreational facilities has placed upon us the burden of protecting our property from roving trespassers, whose ignorance or lack of self respect permits them uninvited to impose upon residents who bought their homes for the benefit of their own families and friends. Those words are from Frederick Douglass's grandson, Haley Douglas, who was developing a beachfront oasis of sorts in coastal Maryland for the elite African Americans seeking refuge from what they considered the criminal element of black folks. Likewise, these words, where as a colored person can I go? If I go among white people, how much rest is there going to be under real or fancied or non existent but anticipated discrimination? If I go among colored people, what kind of colored people are they going to be? Am I going to meet educated and well bred folk? Or am I going to run into gamblers and makers of eternal whoopee? That's from W.E.B. Du Bois in a 1937 op ed in the Pittsburgh Courier. That anxiety about order and respectability within the Black community has analogs across time. Muhammad tells City Lab the internal debate about good guys and bad guys, or respectable people and criminals, is deeply historical and deeply American. However, says Muhammad, we cannot understand the origin of urban segregation without understanding that policy decisions and urban practices were driven directly by this idea of Black people as criminals during this time period. That idea continued to cement as African American migration increased throughout the 20th century, though. Given that Black migrants arrived in northern cities preordained as innately criminal, couldn't get a break. That's just like you and me during that time, moving up north from the South and just being tagged a criminal on GP just because. This helped fuel the white flight that by the 1970s created the segregated city conditions that drove Jesse Jackson, Ebony, and others to demand that policymakers intervene. In that respect, Black on Black crime was for America a self sealing premise. I could go on and on in this article. And I think what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to end the article right here, but I'm going to keep it because I'm going to refer to it again. Because what I want to do is get into that whole idea of bootstrapping. And to do that, I want to hold on one second. I am going to, I don't want to do a share screen. Hold on a second. I want to pull in a video file that I want you to see. Hold on one second. Just give me a minute to find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay. For white people, belief in the notion of colorblindness meant an end to distinctions of color to describe Black people. For them, this was a logical progression, a likely conclusion to the Negro problem, through what they considered successful integration into normal culture. Certainly throughout the 80s and into the 21st century, euphemisms and dog whistles have been successful in getting the racist white supremacist message across to a racialized nation without uttering skin color in public company. Liberal and progressive white people could pretend their discomfort and fear was due to the criminal element within urban areas, inner cities, ghettos, welfare queens, drug addicts, and other metaphors and euphemisms designed to hide race as color. The attempt was to turn the color Black into race as character, while zeroing in through the system of racism on Black people in particular. Will account for the continuation of racist practices and policies. The effect of changing race as color to race as character helped popularize the term bootstrapping in the 1970s for Black people already wounded from generations of discrimination. The genesis of the term dates back to 1834, where it was thought to be an impossible task, ludicrous on its face. According to Caroline Bologna, writing for the Huffington Post, to pull yourself up by your bootstraps is actually physically impossible. In fact, the original meaning of the phrase was more along the lines of to try to do something completely absurd. It would seem the impossibility of pulling oneself up by his own bootstraps can be considered oxymoronic, considering its supposed attainability in American discourse today, especially when applied to Black people where the barriers to success were never really removed. Race as character, however, allowed for the complete idiocy of this concept to be applied. If one can pull himself or herself up by their own bootstraps, then he or she can succeed in America. For Black America in particular, the former is impossible. Then one can reasonably assume the latter is an impossibility as well, and therefore the original intent of the system of racism is sustained without accountability. This is Dr. Cynthia Elise Smith, and this is The Doctor Is In. Thank you. Okay, that is a video that is on my that is a video that's in my list of videos on and this particular one was on bootstrapping and race as character. I do encourage you to subscribe to my channel and look at some of the videos. Not all of them are this long. A lot of them are only about 10 or 15 minutes. Some of them are about an hour. And it gives you another perspective on some of the things that you may take for granted in terms of what you think you know. So with that backdrop, I'm going to read from the book. Oh, geez, I know. See, this is what happens when you have a little home studio in your bedroom and you're using the backdrop from StreamYard. Anyway, bear with me. This is called Bootstrapping and Meritocracy, Using Racist Character as a Weapon. Meritocracy and bootstrapping are concepts meant to connote the ability to succeed in America without barriers and restraints through equal, equitable distribution of humanity for the sake of humanity, which is, of course, for the greater good. Through hard work and living to the letter of the law, both bootstrapping and meritocracy says one can achieve the levels of economic, financial, and social success in the United States without regard to race, color, or any other perceived or preconceived impediment. In fact, the entire American dream is harnessed to these two words. Meritocracy is to white supremacy as bootstrapping is to racism in America. I'm going to repeat that. Meritocracy is to white supremacy as bootstrapping is to racism in America. That means When one is attempting to achieve through merit up to a particular level in the US, that uppermost position is rooted in white supremacy through the very countenance of its form as an ideology. It begs the questions. I want you to pay close attention. Jacko, I know you're loving this. Good. I'm glad you're liking this. What is the highest level imaginable or achievable as measured by what standard? Let me repeat that because these questions are important. They're not for you to answer to me, they're for you to ask for yourself and for you to critically think about the answer that you would give yourself. What is the highest level imaginable or achievable as measured by what standard? 2, what exactly do the terms pinnacle, apex, top, zenith mean in relationship to the measurement of achievement? And 3, what exactly is considered the quote best possible position in which to be placed based on the value scale, where the top means what? In terms of bootstrapping, Dr. Martin Luther King articulated it best when he asked the question of how one could lift himself or herself up by his or her own bootstraps when he or she didn't own any boots, or if possessing boots, when there was someone stepping on them to hold him or her down. Meritocracy and bootstrapping not only work against Black people, for whom the terms were popularized during the post racial colorblind era, both terms have also been used successfully against those who identify as white. Both work against those who are not really considered equal to the wealthy elite because their bootstraps are tied to their own subjugating system of economic class casting. Oxford Dictionary describes the American dream as the ideal by which equality and opportunity is available to any American, allowing the highest aspirations and goals to be achieved. Are you listening to these words? Listen to the words that are being used. The ideal by which equality of opportunity is available to any American, allowing the highest aspirations and goals to be achieved. Now, were not Black people protesting in the 60s for equality of opportunity, equity, equality, equity, opportunity, and justice during that period of time, and still do today? The American dream is quite possibly the most vivid expression of farcical, bleached Americana today. The very use of the term dream should mean, for both Black and white, something conjured when sleeping, because that's what it is, a dream. and not part of the reality we experience during our waking moments. This charade of aspirational attainment appears throughout the definition of the term when one understands in this country today there exists an economic class caste system and a system of racism built into every institution, including economics. While many have reconciled the dream to connote achievement through hard work, as laborious and righteous as it may sound, actually getting to what can be considered the 21st century gentry status or the elite 1% in the United States is virtually unattainable. That's why they are 1% of this population. Therefore, most people appear grateful to live within the status of middle class as the highest aspirations and goals to be achieved. For Black America, however, that opening of opportunity was limited to employment and education during the 1960s and 70s, and the opening has been narrowing steadily ever since. That was 4.3. Now let's do 4.3.1, or bootstrapping. For many liberally minded white people of goodwill, belief in the notion of color blindness meant an end to distinctions of color to describe Black people. For them, this was a logical progression, a likely conclusion to the Negro problem through what they considered successful integration into, quote, normal culture. Certainly throughout the 1980s and into the 21st century, euphemisms and dog whistles had been successful in getting the racist white supremacist message across to a racialized nation without uttering skin color in polite company. Liberal and progressive white people could pretend their discomfort and fear was due to the, quote, criminal element within, quote, urban areas, inner cities, ghettos, welfare queens, drug addicts, and other metaphors and euphemisms designed to hide race as color. Whether a Black person could pull him or herself up by his or her own bootstraps was simply never going to hold as much credence in terms of one's ability to successfully compete in the normal, neutral, and natural state of American culture, because the system of racism was still in the business of denial, discrimination, and limited apportionment of opportunity, especially in the area of economics, through employment and education. Besides, a much more abstract, colorless, and invisible concept turned barrier with laser focus onto was laser focused onto Black America as a way to create a quasi competitive atmosphere in education and in the workplace, one which would serve to deny more opportunity than bootstrapping ever could or would. That concept was and continues to be the myth of meritocracy. 4.3.2, meritocracy. Like the Southern strategy, and certainly racism itself, Meritocracy is also continually debated as to its legitimacy and existence in the United States. It is also considered and discussed more widely outside of the ideology of white supremacy as universally equal and equitable, which tends to hide its built in racially designed barriers. Merit, like white supremacy itself, is yet another true paradox because of the same white power controlling both. While both are a myth based on an idea of something being superior in qualification, both live inside of that same ideology which supports the very racist institutional and structural system created long ago. This concept of merit is still held out as a major reason for the collective failure of Black people to succeed. Even today, merit is the go to word and solution everything from scholarships and entrance into institutions of higher learning, as well as the best positions in employment, in order to deny and apportion opportunity in the same way as overt discrimination had done in the past. Furthermore, merit provides through enough plausible deniability of racist intent to comfort any guilt laden progressive or liberally minded white person who would deny or discriminate using character instead of color to scrutinize. Ashley Crossman, writing for the website ThoughtCo in 2019, described meritocracy as a social system in which success and status in life depend primarily on individual talents, abilities, and effort. It is a social system in which people advance on the basis of their merits. With a definition such as the one by Crossman, even more questions than answers emerge when attempting to juxtapose meritocracy on the one hand simultaneously with white supremacy on the other. This is where concepts such as equity, equality, and the humanization of character, as those characterizations relate to Black and white people, converge. As stated previously, meritocracy as a social system based on the root word merit is supposed to depend on one's aptitude and individual effort. How then does a Black person expect to compete on merit? I want you to hear this. How then does a Black person expect to compete on merit when institutionalized racism in education and employment, for example, has stifled any opportunity for such achievement? How can a Black person expect to succeed on merit when its value system and the aspirations for attainment are tied to white supremacy? So, for those of you out there who are thinking that all you have to do, I'm talking about Black people now. I'm talking about my Black people. Understand that the achievement that you reach is still part of a white supremacist infrastructure. Merit was used to compensate for the disappearance of white and whiteness. I need you to understand this carefully. Merit was used to compensate for the disappearance of white and whiteness as a descriptor for superiority in the areas and activities for which there was a supposed need for qualification. You understand that? I'll read it again. Merit was used to compensate for the disappearance of white and whiteness as a description for superiority in the areas and activities for which there was a supposed need for qualifications. Years ago, back in the 20th century, prior to the civil rights movement, the only thing necessary to be considered qualified was being white. These same racist crafters and manipulators of policies and practices began advocating for merit in determining qualifications. Merit caught on heavily during this period because it had at its start enough benign application in the form of quality of being as particularly good or worthy, deserving praise or reward. In an era where racism as systemic institutional denial and apportionment had supposedly ended with the onset of integration, there was enough plausible deniability using race as character. It had at its root the underpinnings necessary to measure superiority. Child, if you're getting it, if this is illuminating, hit that light bulb again. It had at its root the underpinnings necessary to measure superiority without overt denial on the basis of color. While all of the mechanisms of all the racially motivated systemic institutions churned on in the background to ensure Black people earned no merit. From preschool to high school, the mechanisms were in place to ensure no merit, especially when compared to their natural, neutral, and normal counterparts. If you're in here, um, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed already, and share this video with people who you think would really be interested in expanding and illuminating their minds. Even in the midst of all the denial and limited apportionment of opportunity, equality, equity, and justice, many Black people still managed and continued to overcome the obstacles to achieve merit. Oh, yeah. I'm living proof. In order to compensate for this, however, the individual purveyors and maintainers of the racist systems and institutions devised more and more ways to increase the level of achievement necessary to qualify as meritorious. This is not to suggest that the idea and foundation for merit is wrong. Merit is supposed to be about achievement and ability and being particularly good or worthy, especially so as to deserve praise or reward without regard to color. However, when used under a system of racism, merit is fashioned specifically for the denial and failure of Black people without the ability of those Black people to address or call out the discrimination. You understand what I'm saying when I say that? When it isn't about your color, but about your character, you can't holler racism, can you? Unless you understand racism weaponizing character. And this is what you're learning today. Black on black crime, weaponization of character. In a colorblind nation, institutions that work through a meritocracy were supposed to be colorblind. And while it is pretended to be using race as character, the system maintaining it was not. In fact, the concept of merit as interpreted and its actual application as a designator for qualification continues to live inside of its own enigma as much of whiteness, race, and racism does. When we think of the terms merit and meritocracy, we automatically associate their meanings with two of the most important institutions of American life: education and employment. Of course, these terms have value within other institutions as well, since it can be logically concluded anything having to do with achievement of a goal would have a foundation in merit, such as sports. But even with respect to sports, achievement is supposed to be a consequence of merit. You hear that? Achievement is supposed to be a consequence of merit, which brings opportunities for education and subsequent economic prosperity and employment in that field, as well as continued opportunity once education and or employment have been achieved. You get that? Daniel Markovits, a Guido Calabrese professor of law at Yale Law School and the author of The Meritocracy Trap: How America's Foundational Myth Feeds Inequality, Dismantles the Middle Class, and Devours the Elite, wrote an article for the Washington Post on the 5 myths of meritocracy. He offered a scathing look into the educational system in America, where meritocracy, supposedly the great equalizer, is as false as the notion of true equality and equity in this country for anything other than the supremely wealthy. So understand what I'm saying when I'm saying that, meritocracy is the white man's subjugation as well. And it was folded into racism, to the system of racism, in order to push back against true equality, equity, opportunity, and justice. Yep. Okay, let me go say that again. He offered a scathing look into the educational system in America, where meritocracy, supposedly the great equalizer, is as false as the notion of true equality and equity in this country for anyone other than the supremely wealthy and who are typically white. Markovitz's article was apparently written to be read by the quote mainstream, as evidenced by its obvious use of socioeconomic drivers, metaphors, and the complete dismissal of race or racism themselves as categories to be explored. However, he detailed with crystal clarity the disparities and the resulting realities surrounding conceptions of merit and achievement for everyone. Only needs to read between the lines of his article to draw reasonable conclusions, which portend the most disparate outcomes for Black America through the meritocracy. Myth number one got into the very heart of merit in higher education as unethical at the very least. In fact, in the first myth he uncovered, he stated college admissions are corrupt. This raised an extremely important point about white supremacy and racism in higher education, whether he admitted it or not. A lot of people don't want to throw race or racism in the mix because they want to appear neutral. The rationale for his statement, oh, this raised an extremely important point about white supremacy and racism in higher education. The rationale for his statement and its relationship to white supremacy can be found in efforts focusing primarily on merit through a widely used function of higher education known today as strategic enrollment management, or SEM. But how to sell the idea of integration and assimilation during the post-racial colorblind era did not depend on any particular region of the country, even as the South was presented as ground zero. The notion of assimilation or integration into white spaces was met throughout the country with anger, hatred, and violence by whites towards blacks. As stated earlier, even in the North, faced with the idea of sharing educational spaces, recoiled in anger and distrust of the federal government. Clearly, white people were not yet prepared to lose whiteness. By 1968 and the election of Richard M. Nixon, efforts were already underway to push back vigorously. Black boomers were going to college, and these young black students entering their 20s during the 1970s, which was me, found opportunities that had not existed to any discernible degree before. Back when I got my first job, you had to show your picture on your application. Yet efforts to redress past discrimination being developed in tandem with reparative measures such as affirmative action would prove impotent and unable to rescue black people from the grip of racist policies such as Nixon's law and order rhetoric, policies and practices and laws, along with racist characterizations of black people. SEM, or how to strategically manage to exclude black people from higher education without regard to color. Given the influx of black students being recruited through newly positioned affirmative action efforts in the form of consent decrees, which required state institutions to actively recruit qualified black student candidates, it must have been considered a veritable upheaval of sorts for many of these colleges and universities. Direct aim was placed on education as opposing efforts were underway to undermine the way educational opportunities were being provided to prospective black students. One such effort was through strategic enrollment management, or SEM. Think about that name. Strategic. They had a strategy. There was a strategy on enrollment management, okay? Listen. These words, y'all. Hear. Listen and hear the words and use your tools for navigating comprehension, context, connotation. Okay? When I hear the word strategic enrollment management, I know what I hear and I know what I feel and I know the context and I understand it. I comprehend it. And I'm going to help you do the same. So, One such effort was through strategic enrollment management or enrollment management, which started as a simple coinage in 1976 by John McGuire, also known as Jack McGuire, a Boston College alum and former assistant professor. After becoming the dean of admissions, McGuire began recruitment efforts to attract and retain students at Boston College. One could venture a guess that Boston College might have been losing students to a sort of white flight, similar to the abandonment of white neighborhoods for the suburbs to escape the influx of black families into them. Oh, yes, there was white flight at the universities and colleges in America. Touted today as one of the most important and integral parts of the higher education system, SEM now controls student recruitment, admission and retention, finance and financial aid, and student services. Imagine SEM controls student recruitment, admission and retention, finance and all of those things that are important to anyone intending on a higher education in this country. Ironically, but absolutely not by chance, SEM also controls diversity and inclusion segments of these institutions. It's like infiltrating the Panthers. Okay. There are many references, articles, and the like on the benefits of SEM. There is apparently no debate of its importance in higher education, to be sure, and its ever evolving structure within the institutions it serves attests to its prowess today. Still, there is precious little, if any, information that connects or even associates SEM to civil rights movements or the Civil Rights Act. In text after text, there is virtually nothing substantive to describe the comparative period of time that brought SEM to higher education, except for the fact that both occurred during the same relative period of time, a fact which makes its beginnings truly suspicious. I just say, how my grandson say, sus at best and intentional at worst. It's almost impossible to gauge whether white flight, as that term relates to whites leaving the cities for the suburbs during the era, extended itself to colleges and university during the same period. However, it can be noted that the phenomenon may exist today in higher education, as evidenced in a 2016 article written by Anthony P. Carbonell, director of the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, called White Flight is Creating a Separate and Unequal System of Higher Education. In the article, Carbonell contended that since the 1990s, see how all this stuff works together in tandem during the same period of the 1990s. Black on black crime was rampant. Was being touted as the problem, and the black youth, these very same youth who would be entering the halls of higher education, were the problem and were criminals. In the article, Carbonell contended that since the 1990s, where the number of non-white people enrolling in colleges and universities had more than doubled. You hear that? during the 1990s, where the number of non-white people enrolling in colleges and universities had more than doubled. The three-quarter increase was due to enrollment of predominantly Black students in what was termed open access colleges, while white student enrollment increased in only the top 500 universities in the nation. It would certainly seem that the top 500 colleges and universities in the nation dynamically and strategically managed their enrollment. You know, understand and use these words because this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. Okay? Understand. It would certainly seem that the top 500 colleges and universities in the nation dynamically and strategically managed their enrollment in ways that maintained their independence and inclusivity as leading or top, as that meaning is regarded within the broader scope of meritocracy today. And as their predominance of white students recruited and matriculated today indicates. Jack McGuire's efforts may have been guided by the lower incidence of students in general applying to Boston College and not associated with efforts at affirmative action for Black students, since there is enough plausible deniability here, as in other areas of meritocracy, for any potential debate as to Mr. McGuire's motives. During this same period, however, there were definitely concerted efforts to thwart affirmative action redress within the courts. Indeed, according to Don Hostler and Bob Bontranger, in their book, Handbook of Strategic Enrollment Management, during the period of the 1970s, a conflict, you got to listen carefully to the wording. Use your three tools: comprehension, context, and connotation. Put on your critical thinking cap. Okay? During the period of the 1970s, this is right after the Civil Rights Act was amended in 1968 and it began to take shape. Okay? A confluence of societal, demographic, and institutional factors created an institutional environment in which college and university administrators felt the necessity to be more intentional about attracting and retaining students. What are you reading within the language of racism and white supremacy in that statement, considering the fact that during this period, many Black people were applying to and attempting to enroll in colleges and universities. And there was a confluence of societal. What do they mean when they say societal? What do they mean? What do they mean when they say societal? What do they mean when they say demographic? And what do they mean when they say institutional? I'll tell you. Institutional means the Civil Rights Act, economic apportionment of opportunity in education, systemic policies, laws, institutional. Societal What was going on in society around that time in the 1970s? A tremendous pushback from civil rights efforts. Tremendous. Demographic. The black people was coming in. The black people was like, yes, we can go to college now. We going to apply. Wait till I talk to you guys about when college was free, when colleges and universities were free, and how the fact that they cost money and so much money has a great deal to do with the system of racism. God damn it. I'm going to tell you something. Racism is in everything. It's in everything because this is what America was built upon and based on. Undoubtedly, at that time, some schools were experiencing low enrollment, which was generally due to the number of colleges growing rapidly to keep up with the increased numbers of students looking for the opportunity at a better life through education, including among them many black students. Therefore, whatever the term more intentional meant within the context of the burgeoning strategies related to employment of students and institutions today, it would appear black students may not have been the intended target group. Hostler and Bontrager further stated that in consideration of the demographic and societal trends, pay attention to the wording, because we're going to go over this too. In consideration of the demographic and societal trends, campus based administrators had reason to believe that they had the tools to be more effective in exerting more influence upon their enrollments and their ability to shape the class. Let me read that again. In consideration of the demographic and societal trends, campus-based administrators had reason to believe they had the tools to be more effective in exerting more influence upon their enrollments and their ability to shape the class. The immediate questions to colleges and university administrators after reading the statement that I just read should be, what is meant by shape the class? Remember now, these are questions I want you to ask yourself after as you have on your critical thinking cap and you're listening to what I'm reading. I want you to be thinking, and I want you to ask yourself this question: what is meant by shape the class? What was the intent of shaping the class changing the look of the class? I mean, how exactly would this shaping be accomplished? Why would shaping be necessary? What exactly were and continue to be the tools at the disposal of administrators as an effective means of exerting more influence upon enrollment? In the book, A Practical Guide to Strategic Enrollment Management Planning, the pressure exerted conceivably by affirmative action policies must have led to a major pushback by college and university administrators because plans were developed only to be ignored. Are you hearing me? Plan, plans were developed only to be ignored, and in some cases, done merely to appease outside groups. Now, what were these outside groups? The EEOC, Human Relations Commission, and any other, the NAACP, any other organization of that time whose goal was to get reparation for generations of discrimination in education. It is interesting how educational leaders would take the time to develop plans but then ignore those plans, since they were only being developed to placate outside groups. The connotations derived from the phrase appeasing outside groups is particularly disconcerting, especially depending on who and what the outside groups represented to these colleges and universities during the period of a burgeoning strategic enrollment management system. Given the period of time and the stress placed on colleges and universities in terms of their compliance with affirmative action, the term outside groups could be perceived as a dog whistle for the agencies responsible for ensuring adherence to affirmative action guidelines and groups like the NAACP, ACLU, among others. The fact that this burgeoning set of organizational integration of functions in higher education was occurring simultaneously with affirmative action efforts, creating an increase in the number of Black students enrolling in colleges and university, it is somewhat alarming that the term shaping enrollments consistently figured prominently in much of the texts discussing SEM. Based on the research garnered through texts such as those by Stephen J. Rose and Anthony P. Carbonell in their study entitled Socioeconomic Status, Race, Ethnicity, and Selective College Admissions, and others, affirmative action based on race was no longer seen as justifiable. Did you hear that? Affirmative action based on race was no longer seen as justifiable, especially since they were trying to push the racist character card as opposed to the race as color card during this period of the post-racial colorblind era. Since the reality of race appeared no longer justifiable due to the prospect of lawsuits on, quote, reverse discrimination, income and socioeconomic status, and its association with merit became the focus of where educational leaders directed their SEM strategies. According to Hostler and Bontrager, who, by the way, are supposed to be, they're the leaders. Like in my doctoral program, I received many books on by these individuals as the go-to texts concerning strategic enrollment management and other things like that. Pertaining to education, higher education. So it says, according to Hostler and Bontrager, I bet I'm saying it wrong, but whatever. Although it had been demonstrated by scholars that plans using income criteria alone would not result in equality or equity in terms of Black student representation in higher education, they were careful to remain universally abstract, using the phrase across all races. So what that says is, although it had been demonstrated by scholars that plans using income criteria alone would not result in equality or equity in terms of Black student representation in higher education, they were careful to remain universally abstract by using the phrase across all races. One particular passage from Hostler and Bontrager provided a glimpse into the mindset of educational leaders relative to the burgeoning demographic shifts during the 1970s, where Hostler mused about how the demographic trends would possibly, you got to hear this, would possibly, quote, reduce the sway of rankings publications because post secondary leaders would discover that in order to maintain fiscal health, they would have to enroll more low income students with lower academic indicators. Are you hearing this? He mused about how the quote demographic trends, meaning he mused about the influx of Black students coming in, uh, would possibly reduce the sway of rankings publications, meaning the rankings would go down, just like what they say during in housing. My what does it say? Like my property value will decrease. So their rankings would be reduced because post secondary leaders would discover that in order to maintain fiscal health, meaning in order to stay afloat fiscally, these colleges have to enroll these Black people because uh, they get financial aid from the government when they do. Okay? Excuse me. They get financial aid from the government when they do, but because they would have to enroll more low income, dog whistle, Black students with lower academic indicators. Why do they have lower academic indicators? The very idea of the above statement or post-secondary leaders being virtually forced to enroll more low income students with lower academic indicators in order to maintain fiscal solvency is almost pathetic. These kinds of dog whistle statements connoting Black students are still being propagated today and found throughout texts discussing SEM, and indeed it appears much more attention is given to socioeconomic phraseology such as low income, price sensitive students, and lower academic indicators to describe Black students without the use of color, race as character, and with enough plausible deniability within the structure of socioeconomic criteria so as to hide the intentional racist beliefs and practices. Although many of the texts describe lower enrollment within some of the same discussions of increased enrollment during the beginning of SEM, it is not clear which demographic was being represented as lowering or increasing. By the mid 1970s, the total number of colleges and universities had grown by more than 50%, according to Sean Hill, senior content writer for the website Capture, called The History of Enrollment Management. Suffice to say, there is enough plausible deniability in every text discussing SEM and its inspiration when it began. Moreover, to suggest any notion of something skulking between the surface of a desire to create a strategy for enrolling students, something only discussed in terms of its history as that confluence of societal, demographic, and institutional factors, as stated previously, only brings even more questions than answers. The questions become, what were those demographic, societal, and institutional factors that were all converging during the birth of SEM? Exactly what constituted the massive demographic downturn that concerned these educators, and who were they most concerned about recruiting, especially in light of the burgeoning influx of Black student applicants? based on the hostile climate, hostile climate of the civil rights and education at the time, I would postulate it was the nascent movement of new black students knocking on the doors of colleges and universities and administrators who were now being asked to recruit and admit them. Notwithstanding all of the information contained in this section, merit is diametrically opposed to equality, equity, opportunity, and opportunity for Black people in America. The very definition suggests an even playing field, an equality of opportunity to achieve. However, as long as merit and the idea of the highest, top, pinnacle, best, and all the other terms used to describe the greatest possible accomplishment is built upon white supremacy as the measurement, merit and meritocracy will always fall short of true legitimacy and value. Now there was more to this, but I didn't want to get into the weeds with it. So I'm sure that you can understand based on everything that I have written, Jay, and what I read about supposed black on black crime and whatnot. I am hoping. What was that? Oh God, I've been on here for 2 hours. I'm hoping that I'm thinking actually that I'm wondering whether this all of this will show because I'm not sure whether all of this will come up. But I'm glad that those of you still in the live, were able to see the whole thing. Anyway, thank you very much for coming to class today. Do share this. Do hit that like button and do subscribe and tell your friends and relatives who are interested in some critical thought and some unbleached looks at racism, racist color, racist character, and white supremacism to come here because I'll give it to you and I'll give it to you straight and I will illuminate. Okay? All right. Thank you so much for coming, Jekyll and Riri. And oh, I see someone new. I don't know whether you're still here, but hi, cocaine, Coca Cream. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much for being here. If you haven't subscribed, please feel free to subscribe. And you know, Jekyll, thank you. All everyone watching from Facebook. If there are those of you who are watching from Facebook, um, thank you. Please share. Feel free to share. Subscribe. Follow my page. Follow my pages because this is being seen on both my personal profile page and my the professional page. So I am. Oh, you know what? Before I go, I think I will give a few minutes to anybody who would like to come up. Um, Let me copy that. Anybody who would like to come up and discuss this, uh, I'm going to throw the link in and I'll just put it in there. If you want to come up, please feel free to do that. Please feel free to come up and discuss with me. Um, I bet you didn't know merit was the meritocracy is a sham. It fosters um, competition for the best. Where does that word best come from? That's all about capitalism, baby. I mean, it gets it's so intertwined and so, it's, I would say, prolific. So the link is down there. If you want to come up, please feel free to come up. Please feel free to join. Please feel free to join the live. If you get on YouTube right now, you can, from Facebook, if you just get on YouTube, you can participate in a live discussion. If not, I'm going to give it what is it, 2:55? Let's see. It's 4, good lord, it's 4:35. Jeez. Yeah, I've been on for a while. But I'll stay on for 10 more minutes. If someone wants, well, 5 more minutes, if someone wants to come up and discuss what we have been talking about. Now, why does it show as Facebook? Oh, okay. Oh, it put it in both Facebook and, okay, good. I didn't know that. Go ahead, StreamYard. Yeah. Anybody on Facebook, if you wanna come up and discuss, if you wanna come up and talk, please feel free. Please feel free to come up and talk. If not, I'm gonna say goodbye, and I'll send a community post on the next lecture. I want you to pay special attention to this one because this one is so important. If you need to play it back again, play it back again. Oh, for God's sake, my grandson is here. I'm going to have to go because he is very noisy. So I will talk to you guys later. Thank you. And please remember to share and like. Bye bye now.